we are going to discuss now lists in Python, and we will loop to iterate over a list to display the elements inside a list, right? So let me just first define what exactly is a list. So let me define a variable list courses, and a list is basically an array of elements, or you can say it contains some elements inside it. So in order to create a list, you will have to use square braces, and you can separate the elements using comma. So let's create some courses like C++, Java, and Python. So this is basically an example of a, and you can see the elements are C++, Java, and Python, right? So if you will write print courses, and let's suppose you want to print the first element. So element the index position 0. So C++ has index position 0. So every element inside a list is just given some index position so that you can access it. So if I will write 0 here, it is going to display the first element, which is C++. So on running this program, you will be able to see C++ in here, right? So this is how you can display a particular element of a list. So let's use a for loop to display or to iterate over our list. So what I'm just going to do here is I'm going to create a for loop for x in now I'm going to provide the list here, which is the courses. So let's write some iterations if else statement inside it. So let's say if the value of x is equals to Java, we will write continue, and then we will print the value of x. So this means that in this program you can see that for x in courses means that x is going to iterate over each and every element inside this whole list. But if the value of x is equals to 0, so when x is pointing to this Java element, this continue keyword will just skip this element and it will continue the iteration. So it will not print x, it is going to continue with the for loop, right? So it will go from here to here, it will skip this line. So that's the main use of continue statement. If you will write a break statement instead of it, if you will write a break here, it will break out of this loop and it will not reach here. So that's why we are going to write continue here. So let's run the program and see the output. So you can see here it displays C++ and Python. It has skipped Java, and then it has not displayed Java because the continue statement will break from this particular iteration and then it proceeds with the next element Python. So let's try to write here break, and after writing break, whenever it will go here, it will break out of this for loop and it will not display Python. So you can see here C++ and C++. So that's the main use of Python break and continue keywords. Let's discuss one more function which will basically split our string into list, right? So we know what a list is. What we are now going to do is we are going to split our string in a list, right? So in order to do so, we are going to use the dot split function. So let's call this dot split function on string 2. String 2 is this one. So let's now run this program and you will be able to see something like this. So it has just broken down all or you can say it has splitted all the words inside our string into a list. You can see that this is a list, right? So one more important thing to note about strings is that string is immutable, and immutable means that you cannot assign you cannot do something like this. So let's suppose you want to write string 2 and you're going to specify a particular element, let's say 3, and now you want to assign it to G, and after that we cannot do this because strings are immutable. So if you will run this, you will be able to see an error which says that string object does not support item assignment, which you can see here. So strings are basically immutable, but lists are mutable. That means you can assign something, you can just change the values of a list, but you cannot change the values or the characters in the string. So this is invalid. So lists are mutable. So what you can do with list is, let's suppose you want to write the type of a list like 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if I will press enter, it will display that this is basically a list. You can see here. So type function can also display whether you are using a list or not. So let's try to access the list. So let's first create a list here. We will create a list lst which will hold some values 1, 2, 3, 4. You can also create a nested list. So you can also create another list inside a list, and you can see here that 1 has index position 0, 2 has index position 1, and this whole list, which is this hello world, will be value 4. So if I will try to print 4, you will be able to see that it will display the hello world list. So you can actually create a nested list. So I'm going to write here a comment that this is an example of a nested list like this. So let's discuss about an error, which is the list out of range error. So let's suppose I will write print 3 in list, right? To write 3 in lst to check whether a list has an element. We can use this. So I will write here that this will check whether list has an item or an element, right? So if 3 will be there in the list, it will return a value true. So you can see here it returns value true because 3 exists in our list lst, right? So let's do some formatting in list. So if you want to print only certain elements, let's say you want to print the first 2 elements, that means 0 and 1, 2 is not included. So I will write here 2 is and control enter, you will be able to see 1 and 2. So this is how this is similar to what we have done in the string part here, right? So the only difference between a list and a string is that strings are immutable but lists are not. So since lists are mutable, we are going to write here, let's see where they are mutable. So let's assign the third element as 5, and after assigning the third element as 5, let's display the list. So now you can see here it has changed the third element, which was 4, to 5. That means that our list is mutable, right? So you can also delete some elements from a list, also delete elements from a list. In order to do so, you will have to use the keyword del, and let's suppose we want to delete from the list lst. So we can do so by providing 2 till 4. So this means that the elements 2 and 3 will get deleted. So after deleting the elements, we are going to print our list. So now since I have deleted 2 elements, you can see here 3 and 5 has been deleted, and you can see that it reflects how it reflects in our list. This is how you can delete elements using the del reserved keyword. So now we are going to study about some objects and values. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to create a string s, which is world, and I will create another string which is p, and it holds the same value world. We know that these two are strings, they are same. So whenever you create an object, or whenever you create a string like this, it actually creates an object, and every object has a unique identifier. So if you want to know the identifier of an object, you can use this inbuilt function id and provide it with an object. So I'm going to write here every object has a unique identifier, right? So when you will print, let's print the identifier of p also. So let's run this program and see the output. So that it gives us two values. This one we are not concerned with these values, but you can see that these are two objects which have the same identifier, right? So now what I'm just going to do is I'm going to show you a variation. So let's create another list and let's call it as L1. So let's create a list 1, 2, 3. So in the string case, we have seen that the identifier was same, but now we are going to study the behavior of list, right? So I've created a list L1. So let's create another list L2, which also has the same elements in it. So now what we're going to do is we are going to do the same thing. We're going to print the ID of L1 and print the ID of L2. So when you will run this program, you will observe that now they both have different values. You can clearly see that these two are the different values. It has 4, 8 and 8, 4 in the end. So in case of list, whenever you create an object, they don't have same value, but they don't, because they don't refer to the same object. So when you create two list, there is an important thing to note, which says that they have values. Both of these lists have same values, and strings are also having the same value, and they also have the same identifier. But in case of list, but they don't but they don't refer to the same object, right? So in case of list, whenever you will create a list, both may hold the same value, but both are different objects, right? So let's learn how to clone a list. Cloning list. It might seem boring that why we are doing all these things, why are we concerned with all these strings and list. You will get to know these uses when you will use list in data science. They are very useful in a lot of fields, even in machine learning and in data science. So let's create a list L3, which we are cloning the list, so which means that we are copying one list into another, right? So we are copying the list L2 into L3, and in order to do so, we will use this format. This is L3 equals L2, and in the square brackets we are going to write a colon. So let's print L3. You can see it has cloned 1 2 3. So now L3 holds the value that the list 2 was having, right? So now what we are going to do is we are going to do a very important task. We are going to pass list to a function as a parameter. So let's create a function. Let's define a function head, and what this function will do is it will just display the first member or the first element inside the list. So it will return the first member, which is the 0th member. So whenever you are going to pass, you can see that let me define a list here. So I'm going to make a call to this head function, and I will pass a list. Let's pass L1. So whenever you are going to pass a list as a parameter to a function, it does not copy all these values inside this one. Rather, it passes as a reference. So the list is passed as a reference, which means that if you will make any changes inside this function, it will reflect back in the list L1. So that's the main that's a very important point. So whenever you pass a list, it will pass it as a reference. Reference means the memory reference. So if list 1 is stored in some memory reference, it is going to pass that reference. So let's run this program, and you will be able to see that it will display 1, which is the first element of our list L1.